Yep.
All right, cool. Well, you guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Good on all fronts. All right, thank you guys for joining us for another podcast here. We got a guest again, Vinny. Thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I'm so pumped about this one. I nerd out over this stuff, and we were just talking, like, we love talking to experts and just the conversations we've had. It's clear you're an expert in your field, so
it's a relevant time to do it for you too.
Yeah.
This conversation specifically.
Yeah. I guess to kick us off, why don't you give a little bit of backstory, share as much or as little as you want, what you do, where you're from, and then we'll get into it.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm a consulting forester. I own Heartland Forest Management, and I pretty much travel the whole state of Ohio, doing timber sales, timber management plans, TSI work, a lot of that, pretty much anything involved with, private landowners and trying to manage their forest.
Good deal. So last night I was messaging with a fella. He reached out to me and had mentioned that he saw our post about, hauling the logs out, and he asked me, like, basically what we got for the timber and all that fun stuff. And I told him, I said, did you work with a forester? He was kind of expressing he felt like he got not cheated, but, he was just unsure if he got, the best bang for his buck. He just, hired a logger and that was it. So what are the benefits of using a forester? If you own land or if you want to timber out your land, what's the benefits of using a forester versus not? And what are some of the things that can happen if you don't?
Yes. So pretty much the best benefit is long-term forest health and more money in the landowner's pocket. By hiring a forester and, what are the landowner's goals? And we're going to mark the timber and manage for that woods for the landowner's goals. Everybody has different goals. I mean, whether it's timber management, wildlife management, everybody, some guys are strictly for deer hunting. That's a lot of it. Some guys are strictly for timber. And then sometimes you have to find that fine line in between of wildlife and timber production. So that's the big thing with that, and marking the trees accordingly. If you hire a logger or if there's a mill, oftentimes they're going to want to come in and cut every tree at 18 inches, DBH, so 18 inches, across at breast height. And that's not sustainable at all. I mean, because, you gotta look at the growth rates of all the different species of trees. Well, you can't treat a cherry, a maple, and the oak the same. They all have different growth rates. They mature at different rates. And you have to look at the slope aspect and spacing. There's so much that goes into it that people don't realize, rather than, hey, we're just gonna come in here and whack everything at 18 inches. It's not sustainable, and you're gonna have a degraded woods going into the future for generations. Where if you do it right, hire a forester, have it properly marked, you can do cuts every 10 years. That's a feasible thing. And plus, you're getting that much more out of your timber also. I've seen, I think we all have, seen where people are like, oh yeah, I really got hosed. And it's like, well, if you have a sealed competitive bid and they know what species and how much board footage is in there, you're going to get that much more out of your timber. I mean, I've seen bids from, 50% of what the top bid is all the way up. I've seen bids from 50,000 up to 100,000 on the same trees, and it's not uncommon.
So it's really like, if you're not going to use a forester, is it fair to say that it's almost just luck of the draw with whatever logger you end up contacting?
Yes, it can be. And I will say there are, there's good loggers. There's good mills out there that will come in and purchase the timber, but there's a lot of bad apples in the business too. And, with that, you have to find somebody that you can trust. Up front, find somebody that you can trust, you can do business with them, and they're going to follow, what you want done, and make sure there's a good contract to protect you. A lot of times with, if a mill or a logger's coming in, it's, a little one-page contract, number of trees and payment. And it doesn't outline the reclaim, the best management practices and everything that has to be done, after the fact, when they're cleaning up the logging job and during the process. By using a consulting forester, and you're covered from head to toe, and, then they're overseeing the harvest operation too. Make sure, there's not trees being taken that aren't supposed to. That happens a lot. Things aren't getting rutted up, stream crossings are taken care of, everything like that. And then make sure that, the trails, after they're done, graded out, they're reseeded.
Interesting. It's one of those, like, I feel like you don't know what you don't know situations. I think a lot of people probably don't realize they're, and not that they're necessarily getting screwed, but I'm sure sometimes it does happen. But like, I wouldn't even, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't even know, like back there, did they take something they weren't supposed to, or should that have gone? Should that not have gone? So do loggers not like working with a forester because they feel like they got to be?
There is a fine line with that. Some of the guys, especially the mills that are buying the timber, they know they're going to have to pay a premium if they're going to want, that tract of timber to win that bid. But at the same time, they're not wasting time going out marking the woods and then, oh, hey, we, hired somebody else, right after. And so then they don't have hours of time out there. Whereas forester bid, hey, we'll swing by there, take a look at it, send in a bid if we get it, whatever. Then also with that, they can just send a crew out, and then the forester takes care of looking over things. So it's like, okay, they don't have to deal with the landowner. That's my responsibility. So there's guys that won't bid on, some forester pieces just because they know that they're going to have to pay that price. But then there's other companies that, that they almost strictly cut forester pieces.
Interesting. Okay.
It really depends, and especially the areas that you're in. In this area of Ohio where we're at, the competition is insane. And especially right now, there's just a lot of mills that are very low on standing timber, and it creates for the landowner, it creates a very good market. Very strong market.
Why is that?
There's just not a whole lot of standing timber being sold and really on the market. You see a lot of these, and there's so many. There's what I deal with, depending on the area in the state, in between 40 to 50 different mills. And, oftentimes I don't send to all of those, because I'm only sending to mills and buyers that I trust, either that I have personally worked with or other foresters have worked with. Because there's some guys that I know that I'm not going to send them bid sheets, as I wouldn't want them in my woods, so I wouldn't put them in a client's woods.
Yeah.
That's cool. I think it all starts with education and like understanding what you have. And I doubt when you hear these stories about people that feel like they got cheated, I feel like they don't understand the variability that could come with, one bid to the next. Because I think even you had said, like, you were somewhat surprised at the swing between one to the other.
It was shocking.
And I feel like we probably have maybe a skosh more insight into, kind of a little more education than the average person that might be looking to, have their backwoods logged. So it all probably starts with just, like, kind of understanding what you have.
The value.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's what I came in and, like, when I kind of walked your woods, I kind of told you what I thought was in there. Then once I marked it, I was like, okay, this is an achievable price point, and we blew that away. Essentially, for what it is. This is a very small project, but still, it. Then the next week, I sold another piece that the guy, he was offered for everything 18 inches and above. He was offered like $52,000, and then $50,000 from a couple other companies. I went through, marked it. There's a lot of trees that were, a lot less trees were marked, and I got him $83,000.
Wow. So if he didn't contact you, he would have got 53.
Yeah, or 52,000 and a lot more trees taken.
And that right there is the value of having a forester, because yes, you are paying this person, and if you are so confident to think that I'm going to bring in one person or even maybe a couple people to bid on what I have, these processes aren't being followed, and there's probably a lot more opportunity to be cheated.
Yes.
But then, also your cost in hiring somebody is going to be offset by achieving the greatest value that you could possibly get out of your standing timber.
It really, especially in this area of Ohio, I see it more than other places that, by getting a forester in and getting sealed competitive bids, almost
pays for itself.
Yes, I'd like to say 30% more, on a lot of pieces that people, if they had offers before, I'm seeing that I can get them at least buy right around 30% more.
I can count a handful of people that just from having a brief conversation with them about this process versus what they went through that are like, the gentleman last night, I won't say his name, he was like, after I told him my experience with you, he was like, I'm never not doing that. He's got a couple pieces of property, I think, or more ground. He's like, next time I'm hiring a forester. Yeah. And he just I felt bad because he feels like maybe he got pulled over, one pulled over on him. And he said like his neighbor used the same company, I think like shortly thereafter, and like it was roughly the same type of timber and got like way more, so he just feels uneasy. At least you have the peace of mind, if nothing else, working with a forester, of knowing like, okay, we did our due diligence. Even if even if the price point isn't there, like we know now, like this is all we were going to get.
Yeah, that's what you're going to get maximum dollar out of it. And then say, okay, this is what I really think it's worth. If it doesn't bring that, you have, at least with me, you have a right to reject any or all bids. So if you don't get, say, I really feel this timber's worth this, which I've never had this happen, but it's like, and it doesn't bring that number, okay, let's wait, maybe a couple years, put it back out to bid, or move on. And if you can find somebody else that you go ahead, I mean, that's fine. I'll take that risk.
How many jobs do you go on where once you get in there, you're like, you don't really have anything here? Does that happen?
A lot.
Does it really?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, I would say easily 50%.
No kidding.
Yeah,
50%.
But it's like, okay, people think they have timber and they call me and I go out and it's like, okay, let's set you up. If there's some things we can do, cut grapevines, control invasives, and then in 10 years, then let's plan a harvest. It's just not quite ready yet. I see that a lot.
So you're still giving them a roadmap of like, hey, how can we get there?
Yes.
That was kind of the circumstance down in Southern Ohio on the property that I hunt was, Ben and Keith came in there and looked at it, and I think that was kind of the end opinion was, we'll get there, but it's not quite ready just yet.
Time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Time.
And I see a lot of timber that gets cut too early. A lot. Especially, if there's a lot of these companies that they need timber right away, they'll cut a lot smaller timber and the wrong species too. They're going through, they're trying to get the cream of the crop where, they're taking all the best trees, leaving the rest, and you end up with a high-graded woods that, okay, all your white oak are gone now. Those, you'll never have them back.
There's a secondary benefit too with a sustainable cut, because not only are you getting good value, year one, but then if you're saying we cut it year one in a way that allows us 10 years down the road to do it again, so that's like, just continues to pay you back over the years versus going in at the wrong time and just, wrecking it once without a forester. You don't get what you feel like you should have year one, and then 10 years down the road, you have nothing left to cut again.
Yeah. You're seeing a lot higher yields that way also because, okay, we're taking these trees out for a reason to get better growth rates on the remaining trees to help manage for that. Yeah, in 10 years, you're seeing a lot higher yield than coming in one time and just, wrecking them.
And without a forester, even year one, you probably didn't get what you should have.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
And an unsustainable cut.
Yeah.
You're screwing your grandkids over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
Yep.
All I got in here is a bunch of maple, Grandpa.
Yeah. Yep.
Maple and beech.
Is that typically if you cut like an oak stand real hard, is that what's coming back?
Yes, because that's usually what's in the understory already. Just because you're seeing a lot of shade tolerant species. Maple and beech is a very shade tolerant species, meaning that it can actually start, getting established in the understory with full canopy over top. That's why, if you can implement, controlled burns and then or go through and do some TSI, like I talked with you guys earlier. Okay, let's go through and take out some more of these maple. It's a lot of this understory in here just to help get that oak regeneration going here in the coming years after this cut happens.
Okay, so I did want to ask you about that. So there's a fair amount of I guess I don't know the diameter, but decently sized young maples, right? In there, you go in and all of them, some of them, just randomly.
Some of them, it's really going to depend because you actually do have some really nice high quality hard maple that's getting established. Now, if that's up in the canopy and not directly competing with some of the higher quality red oak that you have in the stand, okay, well that's fine to leave that. But some of the trees that are if the canopies are touching and it's a poorer form soft maple or even the hard maple, getting some of those away, just releasing those oak trees on 2 to 3 sides, get better sunlight because oak is a very sunlight driven species. You need a lot of sunlight. If you can open those up, get better growth rates, obviously then better acorn production going into the future. And then, the other thing we'd focus on is some of the poor quality stuff, especially in the understory and mid-story, just getting that removed. Because a lot of those trees, what people don't realize too is, I'm going to go through and cut all my big trees in the woods so the younger trees have a chance. I hear this all the time. Well, oftentimes there's a lot of woods that are even age woods where those younger trees are just as old as some of those trees in the canopy, but they've been suppressed their whole life. And are they going to rebound? Absolutely not. So it's like, that's where you see a really hydrated woods, is where they come in, take all the large trees, leave the little trees, because that's the best thing to do. It's not, and that's how you get left with a very, hydrated, degraded woods.
Interesting.
What are your hard maple species versus soft? Because I don't know.
So there's like pretty much around this area, sugar maple is your hard maple, and then red maple. You'll in the lowlands you'll see silver maple, and that's both. Everybody just kind of refers to that as soft maple.
Okay.
In a woods like that, are you gonna, or can you expect to get a bunch of regeneration? Just straight from the acorn crop.
Yeah, especially if you get in there, burn, get some of that leaf litter off and eliminate some of that maple competition in there. I think in the next coming years you will see quite a bit of oak regeneration.
Okay, interesting.
Especially in some of the pockets there, where some of those larger trees were removed, or especially some of those multi-stem,
Gotcha.
Red oaks that we've seen in there.
Yep.
You're going to be opening up, a fair bit of the canopy around those. So you're going to see, hopefully, get quite a bit of oak regeneration
popping up there. Do you ever prescribe people to go in and like hand plant?
Yeah, people always ask me that. No, let Mother Nature take its course. You're going to, if you're going in there trying to plant seedlings, oftentimes there's already, if some starting, they have that root system started. They're so set back if you're going in trying to do plantings that oftentimes it does not work.
Too much work with
too much work.
Result.
And yes, and you have to have the right amount of sunlight. You have to have the proper areas.
That comes from like a desire to be, like a steward of the land. Like when you plant food plots or whatever, I remember at one point I thought it'd be a great idea when we were in a drought to fill up a 25-gallon storage tote with water and take it up there. I'm going to water this thing. And it's like one of those things where it's not feasible and you're not going to yield the result that you think you will, even though it comes from good intentions.
You feel good about it.
But it's probably just one of those things where it's like, just let Mother Nature take care of it.
I think we've all been there and we've all tried that. Looking back on what we used to do, it's like, okay, that was fruitless.
Yeah, and you got to learn that. Maybe I needed to make that mistake to realize. Right. Yep.
How did you get into forestry? Was there someone in your family, or? So
my dad was in it a little bit, and then I just really piqued the interest because I seen, a lot of bad practices, unsustainable practices around, and I loved hunting, ever since I'd grown up, deer and turkey hunting, and I was like, okay, I want to be involved, and this being outside, being in the woods, I was like, okay, this is my calling. So that's when I went off to college at Heartland Forest Management. And that's really how it started. And then outside of, like high school, I cut on a timber crew for a little bit. So I kind of got to see, the ins and outs, and that's what I think helps me be a better forester also, because there's a lot of foresters that they just have their college education, to actually know, working the woods, what you can and can't do, how can we get these logs out without skidding these trees up, what you can and can't do with a skidder and a saw, how can we get these trees to drop in an area. And that's what I'm looking at too when I'm marking a woods is, okay, I'm not just coming through and just cutting everything and whichever way it goes, I'm looking at, okay, how can we get these trees to fall in a pocket? I'm going to mark this tree because we can get this tree to fall over here versus, okay, there's a really nice tree that's, but to be able to get to it, we're going to have to take out 2 or 3 potential trees that we'd want to harvest next time. So we're just going to leave that, so looking at that and having the experience from before, I think really helps me versus, okay, I just have a college education. I'm coming out here, I'm going to go mark trees. I see it a lot, and I see that, some of those guys, they can't work with the crews and the buyers, and they don't get as much out of their timber. It really just, they don't want to deal with these guys if they can't handle the landowners, right? Oftentimes, those guys struggle to get bids on their timber that they put out.
When I was walking back there yesterday, you mentioned how you're strategically trying to map and plan out where these trees were going to fall, and I was impressed when I watched some of them laying there, or saw some of them laying there. Like, man, how did he get that to fall there? That's a kudos and a credit to the cutter, but also to you on what, because you're dictating with your markings, right? Because I think I saw a tree with like the ring and then an arrow. Was that telling him where he needs to put it?
Yes, and yet there's the other thing too is some other foresters, they have different markings. So when I walk a cutting crew before they start cutting, I'll walk them through the woods, and if I have an arrow on a certain side of the tree, that's the way I want that tree felled, because there's oftentimes a pocket, and if like the other side, there's probably some trees that we don't want to hit. So if we can put it in that pocket, either if that means pulling the tree, getting the winch, pulling the tree, or getting and pushing it from the backside, or it just however they can do that, that's what I want. When I put an arrow on it. And now I get it. Sometimes, things don't go, the right way. And I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times where, okay, you think this tree's going to go over to the right and it's 180 degrees. I mean, oftentimes not that bad, but I have seen that happen, especially with trees that you don't realize they're hollow at the base and there's not a lot of holding wood. I've seen that, some freaky things happen. So I get that. It does happen, but under the control that you do have, try to do it right.
I'm pretty good at dropping trees where I don't intend to. You're right though. That is, like a good aspect of essentially you are a manager.
Yeah.
Sort of. So there's a lot of parallels with like what I do day to day. I'm an estimator for a construction company, a larger construction company, and like when you're talking to your crew in the field without field experience or field knowledge, and you start barking orders like this is how this needs to be paved or whatever, like you are setting yourself up very quickly to get chewed out. So to have that understanding of how things work in the field and operations, this is how we need to drop this tree, or this is how we need to remove this tree to get to a staging area. That's not only appreciated, I'm sure, by the crews, but then also like makes you as the manager more valuable.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
How are you making sure for the landowner that a tree that isn't supposed to be taken isn't taken?
So with that, I put like the blue ring that you've seen on there, then also the stump marks. So when I'm going through, checking in on harvest, I want to make sure every tree has that stump mark back there. Now, oftentimes, say they hit a tree, didn't go where they thought it would or whatever, or one gets hit, sometimes it gets tangled up, top bust out of it. Okay, I see that tree when I talk to them, that needs to be pulled out, laid off to the side. I will scale that tree, and then the landowner will get an extra check at the end for those trees to make sure that you are paid for them. Yes, it happens every job. There's usually a couple, especially on some big jobs. But then if there's too much of that in the contract, so if the way my contract reads is, say you have 100,000 board feet in your sale, if 5%, so 5,000 board feet of trees were extras is what I call them, trees that were damaged in the process and brought out, if that exceeds that, then they have to pay 1.5 times the market value on that.
What was your percentage on that?
5%.
Okay.
Yep. And I've never had any that, I've had some that were a couple percent, maybe 2-3%, but oftentimes it's just, maybe a tree or two.
Interesting. Does that happens?
Yeah.
Pretty regularly.
Yeah. Almost.
I don't see how it wouldn't on accident.
Yeah. It does. Yep. Absolutely.
Or hang-ups, or
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
Are you too so you're mapping out where these trees are going to fall? Are your logging roads do you have that mapped out ahead of time, or is that based off of where the
trees are, and a lot of times with the terrain? Often if there is a lot of terrain, then yes, that's where the mapping kind of comes through. And I really get down to like on a flat area like this, not near as much. But you're looking at the terrain, what we can do, what we can't do.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. That's why it was interesting too. Like I think I told you, but I was really reluctant because of some of the horror stories I've heard to even get the woods timbered in the first place. Yeah. So I don't know how many different logging companies come out before I ever contacted a forester, but then I had a forester come out, I think 2 years ago, and he was not a hunter.
Yeah.
And so our main objective here was not for the monetary value, but more or less to make the property better for specifically deer hunting.
Yep.
But he was not a hunter. So having him come out here, it was just very interesting. Like I was asking questions geared towards hunting, and he just was like, this tree should go. And that was basically it. Yeah. Which I appreciate, but I recommend for anybody listening, if you're getting your property timbered and you're able to have a forester that's also a hunter, that was a huge value add. When we were looking at the access and the wind, it's like you understood that.
Yes.
Whereas when I mentioned some of those things to that gentleman, no fault of his at all, but he just was like, I don't I don't know.
Right, and that's where he's strictly geared towards timber, growing timber production, and that's how that woods would have been marked versus okay, this is what we want, set it up for wildlife habitat, all that, and also keep that timber production and long-term goal in mind while doing that.
It was actually funny. I was trying to I think you know who this is. I was trying to explain to him kind of like my goal, and he was like, well, I would just the back of the hardwoods, he's like, I'd just clear cut it and just make that all bedding, which I mean, that probably worked based on the wind, but it was just funny. Like he was like trying to, he was trying to help.
I don't remember. Was that a state forester? Or former state forester?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
Might be former now, I think, but great, like the nicest dude.
Very
but
nice.
It's just, now that I got to see, both ends of the spectrum, like if you have a hunting property, like if you can find a forester, which I imagine there's probably a handful of hunting foresters.
There is, and there's a lot of, I'll say, a lot of the foresters are older. There's not a lot of younger foresters. I mean, there's a handful that, guys that I know that are younger that are in the field, but really it's, probably the average age is 60. And there's actually probably very few that are actually avid hunters that I actually know.
Interesting.
But yeah, there's...
So call Vinny.
Yeah.
Can you imagine trying to explain to that guy the logging road needs to be 15 feet this way because if it were 15 feet that way, it's on the wrong side, on the wrong side of the blind. Like, So what does that mean?
Right.
That's exactly right. Oh, that's too funny. You said you cover all of Ohio, right?
Yes. Yeah. Most of Ohio, obviously, the farther away has to be the right job. Make it worthwhile. And knowing the markets too. Once you get down southwestern Ohio, I'm not near as familiar with some of the loggers and buyers as up here. I have a more of a following too. Guys that they're asking me, hey, when's the next piece coming out? What do you have? I have a really good following, and I know them personally.
Are you like, how many jobs do you have going on at one time, give or take? I'm sure it varies based on time of year.
Yeah, right now there's two jobs getting cut right now. But I mean, there's been some times where I have 4 or 5, but oftentimes there's sometimes there's none. They're just sitting in contract, or then I'm just out looking for more timber. Going to calls. Hey, I want to see what I have on my property, stuff like that, or doing invasive work. Or TSI, stuff like that.
So you do that type of work under your business as well?
Yes.
Okay. And then as far as like following up on somebody that thinks they might have something, like they call you to come look at it, is that like a free?
Yes.
You just show up and say you either got it or you don't?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. That's all part of the job, and that's why I always tell people I offer free initial consultations too. Hey, I'll walk through your property and I'll give you my honest opinion and recommendations of what I see. And maybe just a plan for moving forward.
Do you get on X beforehand? I'm assuming.
Yes. And I have a really good idea if there's gonna be timber or not.
He's dropping bedding location pins.
Yeah. My Onyx is a mess.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
There's a lot of pins.
That's got to be a blessing and a curse because you probably get let down a lot. Like you get the call initially, you're excited, and then you pull it up, and you're like.
Yeah. They just like then you're looking back, and then I'll also look at Google Earth, like the history, and you can go back.
Yep.
And oftentimes I'll see, oh man, this thing was cut in 2015. It's like, and probably wasn't a sustainable cut. So yeah, there's probably not a whole lot here that should be cut.
Could you tell, was that ever cut
on yours?
Yeah.
Yes, it's been a very long time. A lot of those multi-stem.
Okay, those were cut before.
Yes, that's actually stump sprouts.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yep, but it's been a long time since your guys' place has been cut.
Okay, I was curious because I know we found what year was that? The aerial that you pulled up.
Oh yeah, I use a different website or whatever, and I don't know what year you could go back to, but we went way back.
It was like the 90s, I think, but it was like almost all pasture back there, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, a lot of that to the south there.
Yep.
And there's probably just that little hardwood patch.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
It's cool too because you can add a second layer to that site and overlay it with modern day.
Yeah.
So if there's ever like an old home site or whatever, you can see exactly where that would sit, where it would be today and go check it out or whatever.
Yeah, that's cool.
I like doing that stuff.
Yeah, it's fascinating for sure. Oh shoot, what was it? Oh, what's like so the wrap up process then? So we kind of went over, your initial contact, what goes on during the job, the bids and everything. Obviously, the timber's cut, it's wrapped up. Where do you how do you tie a bow on the whole thing?
Okay, yeah. So just making sure, we're dotting the I's, crossing the T's on the contract. Make sure the contracts are filled. Make sure all the roads are graded out. If they've got some elevation change, get some water bars in there for water diversion. Then coming through and seeding the trails and seeding the landing, make sure everything's cleaned up the way it is, no ruts, anything like that. And then I'm going through and doing a final check. Make sure okay, hey, there wasn't trees stolen, anything like that. Or if anything, tops of trees need, pulled one way or another, if, property boundaries, stuff like that, make sure all the trails are clean. So that's kind of the wrap up process of it. The last process is just going through and seeding the trails.
You seed it with clover?
Yeah.
And you do that on every job?
Yep.
That's awesome.
I like that. Yeah.
I'm just thinking now, like I've got a couple different folks that have had their woods timbered and their experience, and it's like, they
and oftentimes I get phone calls and it's people right after their woods got harvested, and it's a mess, and it's like, what can I do? I was like, and at this point the damage is done, and there's oftentimes places where it's like, okay, you really want to know what I recommend? Go through and cut every last tree that is still standing, clear cut the place. You're better off with an even age stand. Everything's going to come up, because at that point in time, all they have is junk that's left, and that's what's going to be regenerating. It's just like anything else. Like you look at a deer with good genetics and that old bully buck, that's what you're leaving, and that's the genetics that you're going to be getting for years and years and years future down the road. So trees have genetics just like anything else. So you have to leave those high quality trees to seed in the next generation.
It makes me think of like the little girl that got a hold of the scissors in the house and like butchered her hair, and then the mom takes her to the salon and like, shave her head. I don't know.
I'm sure in those cases though, like if you were to pull out that contract, according to the contract, everything has been fulfilled.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though these people are like, man, we got screwed essentially.
No,
per contract,
and there's nothing they can do. Yeah, I mean the company probably say we're coming through and we're cutting it. And another thing I see is DBH is diameter at breast height versus cut on the stump.
Yes.
So on the stump, well, you can take a shovel and you can start digging. So if someone said 18 inches on the stump, that might only be a 14-inch, diameter tree at 4.5 feet off the ground, and it's gone.
See, I've heard a lot about that too. Out of just a personal interest, I've dug into this a little bit, and I've heard about people measuring at the ground level versus breast height or whatever.
Those trees flare out,
all of a sudden, you took however many, you could double, triple, whatever, however many trees that qualify for your diameter.
Yeah. Yep. You see it. So that's really, if nothing else, have a forester look over your contract. Because there's very good mills, there's very good loggers that I would trust without me being involved. By all means, there's guys out there that do it right, but there's a lot that don't.
That just have to be such a helpless place to be. I mean, like, the damage is done. You're sitting here looking at the remnants of what you're left with, and knowing there's nothing you can do. And this isn't, we talk about how growing a 4-year-old buck stinks because it takes 4 years to grow a 4-year-old buck. When you're talking about timber, this is something you will probably not see in your lifetime to be, mature enough to cut again.
That's why I feel like it's so important to just like be patient and do your due diligence and hire a forester instead of just rushing into it.
Yeah.
I know you live and you learn, but when I first bought the place, I had a guy come out, and you probably can diagnose this, but he came out, walked it, and like gave me a bid like on the spot.
Yeah.
And I told him, I was like, I need to, think about this or whatever. And he called me like a few days later and was like, hey, we can actually do like this much better. And I was like, And then like a week later, he called me again. Hey, we can do better. And it was like 4 to 5 times he called me, and was like, and I'm thinking like, wait a minute, something ain't right here.
You tried to,
Is he trying to lowball me?
Yeah. Yep. And that's what happens without a forester involved too. Is okay, hey, we're taking this many trees, or we're saying that there's this much board footage in the woods, where they very well know that. Oftentimes I've run into that too. Is trees were already marked. On this property, they said, oh yeah, we'll give you $1 a board foot. There's 50,000 board feet. Well, I went in there and there's 95,000 board feet. I've seen that happen because they'll lower the board feet and then say a really good price per board foot because, hey, we talked to Farmer Joe down the road and this is what he got. Well, this sounds really good, But, knowing exactly how much footage, which species, and having your trees marked, to know exactly what's going to come out before signing a contract is...
And that's the only way to get comparable bids. I mean, that is exactly what I do every day for work is, when a municipality, whether it's county, township, city, whatever, they give us the quantities as the contractor. I look at those quantities. Every other contractor bids those quantities, and we turn them in. Whether there ends up being more or less, the bids are the same. They're comparable.
Yes.
A guy could come back here on this job and offer, let's just say, $20,000. Some other guy could offer double that, but it's because he's planning on taking 3 or 4 times the amount of timber.
Yes.
So it's like that is the importance of having it marked. The total dollar value is kind of negligible unless you are all bidding the same exact
on
thing.
The exact same thing.
Yes.
Yep.
Speak of the devil, the logger. My phone's been ringing like crazy over here. I don't know if you felt it, but the logger's been calling me asking if it's raining. I should probably call him back.
Yeah,
I might call him real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pouring. Is it Roy?
Yeah. Oh, did you give him his number?
Yeah, when I ran up there yesterday, he's like, "Can I get your number in case it rains?" So I'm like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah.
So, like, sure enough, I got a voicemail.
I was gonna call him first thing in the morning too. I was like, he had hammered.
Yeah, it was. Is it still?
It's not.
But it's
We can get a little
wet.
cameo on here.
Yeah.
Have him.
I was wondering, it was buzzing like crazy. I'm like, who's calling me? It was a 330 number. I don't have it saved, but I saw you left the voicemail.
Voicemail. Hey, it's raining.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably will.
Vinny's making sure he's here right now. He's making sure you're not cheating us.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Nick just calling you back. I'm sorry I missed your call. I did get your voicemail though, and yeah, it was pouring this evening for, I don't know, probably on and off for an hour maybe. So it's pretty wet, but I might be tied up here a little bit this evening. So if I don't answer your call, I apologize. But yeah, I guess to answer your question, it's been raining a little. I will talk to you later. Thanks. Bye. It's funny. It's funny. Triple called me.
Yeah. Oh. Well, it's probably because he just had the phone for a lot of these Amish.
Oh, yeah.
They only have the phone for 10 or 15 minutes. They go out to check the phone or whatever, then they put it back. And that's it for the night. So
Kevin told me he's been calling Mike Lee on their podcast, and I'm calling Roy.
Yeah. We're not the same. We're talking to senators, and you're talking to foresters.
Which I was cracking up yesterday. When I ran down there to get the checks, I drove down and then walked up to the food plot, and I could hear him coming in the skidder, and he comes driving past, and it was his little boy.
Yeah.
I think he said he's 10.
Yeah.
I just could not believe that. Most 10-year-olds are sitting behind their Xbox, and they're so sheltered, and that little man was driving that giant machine hauling 2 logs. And
They're a different breed.
yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah.
One-man job, too. How big is a crew typically? Does it depend on the size of the job?
Yes, oftentimes. I mean, there's a couple one-man crews, like, pretty much this, but, it has his kid helping out a little bit there because there's a lot of guys that'll cut and skid all by themselves. And it takes a while oftentimes, but oftentimes two guys, one guy cutting, one guy skidding, and sometimes, hey, we'll switch at lunch or whatever, so you have that. Then sometimes, like on some bigger jobs, you'll have, guy cutting, guy on the skidder, then a guy at the landing, butting logs to length for truck length, stuff like that. Just makes the process a little bit smoother, especially when you have a lot of volume and you're trying to get a lot of trucks and logs into the mill. That really speeds up the process.
Do they typically, and it probably varies, but when they're taking the logs to the landing, do they start hauling them away before they have them all out there? Or do they typically get them all out there and then start taking them?
Yeah, as soon as they usually get a load or two, they'll have trucks on the way. Start grabbing loads and go from there, because they don't want the landing to fill up, too much. But
yeah, that's what
especially when it's really tight like this. It's really tight, and it all depends. Sometimes if there's an open field and it's middle of winter and they're not worried about getting crops in, yeah, you can have pretty good pile.
Yeah. Which, when you said open field, that's a topic I wanted to talk to you about. So this property sets up. There happens to be a large ag field directly beside the timber. Ideally, coming in that field would be great. However, we don't own the field.
Yep.
Do you recommend, if at all possible, to just stay on your property?
Absolutely. There's been too many, oh yeah, the neighbor's going to let me go through, and it turns into a nightmare. You think you have good neighbors and everybody's going to get along, in which that's fine, because that sometimes that is the case. But if you can just stay on your own property, it's just eliminates so much of the headache, getting extra signed contracts with the neighbor and stuff like that. And then, hey, the reclaim, they're not happy with it. It can snowball really quickly and turn ugly. So if at all possible, if you can, especially with logging, there's always neighbors that, you get the phone call, angry neighbors, and that's what you deal with a lot of angry neighbors, worried about the property lines, stuff like that. And that's another big thing too, is property lines. People are always worried about crossing the property lines, that's where I think really with because I still survey part-time, throughout the week, and having that experience too, and be able to look at property lines, and then even pull up surveys and run compass bearings to make sure, I'm marking this line properly. Or if there's a big question, hire a surveyor to mark the line. Having that, there's not a lot of guys that will do that too. Because if you in Ohio, if you cut a tree across the line, that landowner technically is, 3 times that tree's value is what they could sue you for.
See, that's a question I'd had, because down south the neighbors had their property logged, and there was numerous trees where, the fence has been there forever. So I don't know who put that fence in and where it falls in reference to the actual property line, but some of these trees were growing within the fence.
Yes, and they took them.
And
the thing, people just think fences are property lines. And with my surveying experience, oftentimes, so corner to corner, okay, the fence is at the corners, but I've seen it where fences bowed 50, 60 feet in the middle, especially in hill country, where that fence isn't even close to the property line. And that's what people go by, is a lot of the fences, and you can't oftentimes.
Yeah, I've wondered about that, because, first seeing these cuts, I'm like,
yep.
Some big oak trees too that were taken. It's like, how do you know?
Yeah. And if there's something in the fence like that and they didn't even talk to the neighbor, like, hey, neighbors talk or whatever, we'll split it 50-50 or something like that. And I've seen a lot of timber trespass where, people didn't know about it until, hey, we went back in our woods the other week and, all these trees are gone. And sometimes it's just, there's no occupation. So there's no fence, no rock row, anything like that. And where they've came over and they've stole, 50 trees or more.
So as the landowner who had no part in the logging, you were the one who was trespassed on. What do you even do in that situation?
So that it does become sort of it's a hard situation. So hiring a forester to come in and get the value of those trees based off of the stumpage. So you're looking at the stumps, and then you're looking at the surrounding timber, looking at the quality in the form of that, to come up with a footage and a quality estimate based off of the stump that you're seeing. And then at that point in time, you can put a market value on it. So yes, it can be done, and that's what needs to be done, so you get paid for those trees.
Have you ever had a sticky situation like that?
Yeah.
No kidding?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
That sounds like the ultimate
stressor.
I
know. I don't like getting involved with it, because oftentimes, if they don't want to pay, it oftentimes will lead to court. And, if you can stay out of it, that's great, but there has been situations like that.
Oh, boy. Yeah. That stresses me out thinking about it.
Yeah. Super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And neighbors that used to be good that are not anymore.
Yeah. Hey, you owe me. A few grand or whatever.
Because sometimes it's the landowner saying, yeah, I own all the way over to here. And, they don't, and then these loggers just taking the landowner's word for it too, oftentimes. Or I've seen it on the other hand where it's like, oh, that was a really nice tree. Of course they came over, like they're just trying to push the limits because, hey, maybe there's, veneer white oak or veneer walnut over there, and that tree gets taken. And there was one instance where I actually had a tree marked on a property, and it was, on the property that I was, it wasn't cut yet. It was just in contract waiting. Showed back up and that tree's gone. But the neighbor's woods got cut.
Wow.
I had that happen one time.
Did you pursue that, or did the landowner want to pursue that?
So both the landowners talked, and they were really good friends. And I know that landowners, down the road, hoping to purchase the neighboring property. So that one just kind of stopped
pick
right
your
there.
battles.
Yes, they picked their battles. They're still friends. Stuff like that. But that one, yeah, I mean, I had blue paint on that tree.
Which that wouldn't necessarily so much be that landowner that said, go cut that, as it would probably be the logger that saw it.
And it was in
like,
the far corner,
Sure.
far back corner where they're like, okay, we can get this. No one's going to notice, And, it was a good 15 feet over the line. I mean, the property corner pin was right there.
The fact that you had it marked, though, even if it is no man's land, I'd look at that and be like...
And I know the logger that did it, and I've never had them on my bidder list. And just because of the stories I've heard, and that just pretty much solidified it for me.
Sure.
Man, that's like the Wild West.
Yeah.
Could be anyway.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah. Another question I had for you, which is kind of unrelated to that, but if a person were looking at purchasing a property, would you or have you ever walked a property with a potential land buyer to evaluate timber value?
Yes, I do that actually quite a bit because I'm also a realtor with Mossy Oak Properties. So oftentimes when people call, hey, I want to take a look at this property, they're calling me also too as far as the timber value. Or if when I'm selling a property, people are like, okay, what's the value of the timber? It's like, well, I can help you. So looking at that and then adjusting, the value of the property to meet that also.
Yeah.
So I do quite a bit of that too. People call, say, hey, I'm interested in this property. Here's my budget, but what kind of timber value is there? It's like, okay, is this going to help me, install a driveway? Maybe build my house? Stuff like that. I do quite a bit.
Yeah, that was a question I had too, because obviously for many of us, purchasing land is a goal.
Yeah.
And the ability to evaluate timber value should be factored into, whatever that asking price of the property is. Like, is this property, am I going to gain value when I purchase it? Or is there, I don't know if you want to call it equity in the timber value? And yes, I can look at a tree and be like, that's a white oak, or that's a red oak, or that's a maple, or whatever. But I don't think I can accurately diagnose the value of the timber.
Right.
So I would want somebody with me to be like, you're either getting something here or you're not.
Yeah. And another aspect of this too is, and that's what I did for you guys, is the timber tax basis. So basically, a timber tax basis is an appraisal of your timber for the time of purchase of the property. So say you buy, 50 acres in year 2000, and there's $100,000 in timber on it. Well, you don't cut that till 2020, and there's $150,000 in timber. You'll only have to pay taxes on that, the growth, the 50,000. Or say you're going through and doing a very selective harvest, you might harvest 2 to 3 times before you actually have to pay taxes on that timber. So that's one thing. If you are buying property with timber on it, get a forester out there and get that timber appraised, have that timber tax basis, set in stone. And that's also good, just so the value of the timber, and then also for, say storm damages. If you have a storm come through and you can report, okay, hey, here's this loss that I had. If you can't salvage some of the trees, because oftentimes, with a storm, things are getting twisted, cracked, split, where you're going to lose some of that volume, in those trees and those logs, where it's like, okay, this was a loss.
Similar to like a crop damage claim from a storm. Okay. Yeah. And then as far as like a timber appraisal, that's something you could do. I mean, let's say you're not logging anything. You're not getting bids for, potential logging. You just could appraise timber value.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. I do a lot of appraisals.
I'm glad you brought up the timber tax basis. That was something I wanted to talk to you about. Is there a duration for which you have to own the property before you're able to benefit from that?
Yes, 1 year.
It's just 1 calendar year?
Yep. Okay. 1 year. Yep. It's just like capital gains tax with land. If you're trying to buy and flip land, if you sell it with under a year, you're paying a higher capital gains. So with the timber, it's just basically, okay, if you buy a property with the intent just to harvest the timber and flip it, there is that duration of 1 year that you need to wait before you would, harvest that timber. It's pretty much just trying to keep people from, going in through destroying this woods and getting, just cutting and burning, basically.
Yep.
Another benefit of hiring a forester, because that's something I only had heard about that because my accountant was like, hey, that property you bought, don't timber that for a year. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And he mentioned that, and we didn't plan on it then anyway, but I kind of completely forgot about it. And then you brought it up. And thought, I've heard this before, but I didn't know the ins and the outs of it. That's interesting.
Yeah. And that's something I recommend for everybody. Even if you don't really have that much harvestable timber, you don't want to be paying more in taxes than what you have to.
Amen.
That could be big down south. Like, we determined it's probably not ready yet, but if you could have that timber appraised now, then in the future.
Well, and even with that too, is I can look at the soils, the slopes, and the growth rates of what trees you have on your property. Now, it gets a little bit harder, especially when it's 20 years down the line, but I can grow that timber backwards because it has to be from the purchase date, the appraisal from the purchase date, but I can grow that timber backwards. And then I have to look at, so there's actually the Ohio State Extension puts out a timber price report for twice a year that I can go back through, look at the regions and the species, and actually put a price from, say if it was 2015 when you bought the property, I can go back and look at 2015 market values.
That's super cool. I would have never guessed that. It was 16 when we got the property. So we're almost 10 years in.
Yeah. And so you can grow it backwards and have that appraisal done. So then when you do harvest, say you harvest in another 10 years, especially if you do it, a selective harvest on the property, you won't be paying, probably any taxes.
That's super cool.
On your
We'll have to look into that.
And is that then based off of, like, if you don't timber your entire woods like we did here, or is it based off of all of the timber on your property, or just the section you're timbering?
The whole property. Any marketable timber. When I go through, I'm trying to get the highest number for the landowner, so it's, evaluating all the timber on your property. It's not just, if we're just cutting this section or anything. It's anything on that property that you purchased.
Interesting. What's like king of the timber market?
Walnut, white oak.
Has it been that way for?
Yes, and it will be. I see, walnut could fluctuate. I see that because there's a lot of walnut that gets put in shipping containers and goes overseas. You see a lot of that. Whereas your white oak, there's a lot of local uses, and then whiskey staves. There's just a lot of uses that stay in the United States for white oak, and there's just less and less and less white oak because of ways that these woods are getting harvested.
You would think that alone would drive the actual people going in and performing these cuts to want to cut sustainably, knowing that their supply is being depleted.
Yeah.
You would think that would make them want, unless it's one of those cases where, kind of like people get with hunting. It's like there's fewer and fewer bucks, so I'm just going to, take every opportunity I can to take the first best buck I can.
Yeah.
We get...
No, and that's the problem. Hey, we got the contract on this,
Take it while it's available to us.
That's what they're doing. They're trying to get the most out of it. And it's not sustainable, but hey, we'll never be in here again. We're grabbing what we can.
Yeah. Yep, I can see both sides of that.
Yeah. In northeast Ohio, or I guess just central Ohio, right where we're at, what do you see primarily? Like a big, let's say 100 acre chunk of timber. Is it not many white oaks around here?
There is some properties that have really good white oak.
Because
but
down south,
less and less.
There still is a lot, right?
Primarily
what's on Eaton's farm.
Yeah, and I know there's a big push for oak management down there. I don't know.
Yes,
they're very focused on that right now.
Yes, and it should be everywhere. But oftentimes, the biggest thing that why we're not seeing oak anymore is there's no fire in the landscape.
Yeah.
There used to be fire in the landscape, and running that through the woods, that would be taking out the competition, the maple and the beech, those thinner bark species that would actually die off from a fire, where the oak and the hickory, they'll actually live through that fire, and then those flourish. So we're seeing less and less of that, and then unsustainable logging practices. Where they're cutting all the oak, and what's left is maple, beech, poplar's gonna come up, aspen, all those species that, you're just not seeing the oak that, you were, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago.
And at that point, it's too far gone. 100 years from now, it won't be like, we got a bunch of white oaks now. You think it's just...
unless it's a very managed property, it's just going to be less and less and less.
Yeah. You think we have any threats? I guess there'd be no way to actually know, but like the ash borer with anything else, with oaks or...
Yeah, I mean, there's like, so you got oak wilt. There's obviously like the gypsy moss, stuff like that. I mean, and there's always, it's coming in overseas on shipping containers. A lot of the invasives, the pest, everything like that. So who knows what's coming next? You know, it's kind of a wait and see, and you hope you don't see it, but we may in our lifetime.
I just told Easton, I heard on a podcast this week something with the apple trees, and I don't remember what it was. I thought it was a bug, but Don Higgins was talking about killing a bunch of apple trees.
I know, like cedar apple rust is I think that's a
that?
fungus or whatever that's real big. But yeah, I mean, as far as insects go, I'm not sure what that would be.
I think it was an insect. I don't know, but my apple tree out back here is dead, and I was like, is that why?
They got it.
Yeah, they got it. I'll say the biggest thing that I'm dealing with right now too is landowners in eastern and southeastern Ohio with the poplar on their property. From this last fall, we had that drought, and there's areas that it was really bad, and then the poplar weevil will actually go into the foliate, eat the leaves. That there's poplars that this spring never came back, and I'm dealing with a lot of that. And then there's some that are 50-50, they leafed out but not really that strong. And I've talked with other foresters, and I had really good conversations. It's like, we don't know what's going to happen, so what I'm treating this as right now is, the really bad pockets that I'm seeing, we're going to go in and harvest. We're going to mark the other trees, just in a different color paint, just so we can kind of monitor those and see what happens. Just it might be another thing where, okay, next year we got to go back in and harvest those trees because they didn't come back on year 2.
You said poplar weevil?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So I truthfully, are you talking like tulip poplars?
Yes.
Or,
Yeah,
okay.
tulip poplars.
I was going to say, we have, it seems like a lot of those down south, and truthfully, I hate them.
Yeah.
just from a deer standpoint, like if I could just have straight white oaks, I would.
Oh, absolutely.
But there is a value on those. I mean, that's
Yes.
marketable timber.
Yes, poplar, it can be a very marketable tree. The biggest
Generally
thing with,
straight.
yes, it's straight, very fast growing in the volume that you get out of a tree. They're very straight. There's not a whole lot of taper. And there's a lot of uses here locally. There's a lot of mills that'll saw poplar, and there's some that older, like reverted pasture grown poplar that obviously there's a lot of limbs, and you'll have a lot more knots. Kind of gives it a little bit more of a rustic look. That's going to be on your lower end, whereas there's some really nice clean poplar that I've seen poplar sell for 70 to 80 cents a board foot, where in this area of Ohio, in southern Ohio, you're just not going to see that. In and around this area with the competition, if it's a very nice poplar stand, I mean, it's nothing to see 70 cents.
Okay, that was my next question, is if southern Ohio kind of had a market for that, or if that was...
There is, but you just don't expect near as much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, which I would say we probably fall more into that old reverted pasture,
Poplar.
lots of branches, and...
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
There's like rows of them back here, I think, with sweet gum or something.
Sweet gum. Yeah, you got sweet gum in there.
Yeah,
Planted,
back in the day. Yeah, a lot of people. I see that a lot too.
That was definitely pasture where those were.
Yes. Yep.
Interesting. So you mentioned your real estate agent on the side as well.
Yep.
How does that mix together? I assume exceptionally well with your forestry job and being in real estate.
Yes, absolutely. No, and it really just does go hand in hand. Working in the woods, and then being a real estate agent that specializes in land. Hunting properties. Oftentimes you get repeat customers and clients from hey, I sold you this property. Then they call you up down the road. So stuff like that really does go hand in hand.
Gotcha. So you're probably finding sheds on your listings and on your forestry jobs.
Okay. Yeah, I do find a fair amount of sheds.
I had that question back in my memory bank, was to ask him at some point if you found any like just freakish deadheads or sheds or anything on your jobs.
Yes. There was last year. I found there was a job in Licking County that I found some really nice sheds on. And that guy, he wasn't a deer hunter. I asked him, hey. He goes, no, take them.
That is about the best situation.
Yeah, he goes, especially if they're in the fields. I don't want them in the fields getting in the tractor tires. I'm like, okay. So
what are the odds that you find some hammers and you get to keep them?
Yeah, and then on that job, I was kind of combing the cornfield. Well, got out of the woods, and then I started combing.
You're
around.
Not paid by the hour,
right?
So I was gonna say I'd be hanging out there all day long.
That's awesome.
No, and in most years, I mean, this year I didn't find near as many. I didn't really find any really like slammers this year. Some good, respectable 3 or 4 year olds, but no good slammers. But yeah, last year before that was found some really nice sheds.
You're obviously on a ton of properties. I hear a lot of guys talk about how, like, in Ohio, especially this area, like, there's not a property that's not hunted. Have you ever timbered a property where there's, like, no hunting?
I wouldn't say no hunting, but very limited. It's just a landowner that they really don't want anybody hunting, but they have a really close friend that comes out maybe 2-3 times a year. But I know of properties that don't get hunted.
Yeah, I know of a couple as well, but
it's very, very anymore. It's very slim, especially with people. Some of these people that used to not let hunting. Then they're seeing the deer density in some of these areas, and then also when people start shaking money in front of their faces for leases.
Yeah.
When we talk about properties that aren't hunted, we're looking at it from the aspect of, like, that person's never been asked, but they would allow it. Is like how we like to think that there's land out there, and I don't think that exists a whole lot. I think the properties that straight up aren't hunted are, like, owned by people who are either worried about the liability or, like, complete nature freaks and are like, do not harm my animals. Yeah.
Have you gotten access because of your job? Is that a perk of it?
Yeah, I could. There's a couple that I could, but I really haven't really pursued a whole lot of it. I know there's been some where the loggers, they asked. It's like a property. It's like, okay, it's like 20 acres and it's like an hour and a half away. It's like, do I really want to mess with it or something like that? But the logger's like, hey, do you think we could hunt? And they're like, sure, So I've seen that happen before, but I really don't push it too terribly much. Now, if it was a slammer property and it's like, okay, I think I can get permission here, obviously I'll ask.
Yeah.
But I really haven't.
I was laughing last night. I was talking to my dad, and he asked me, he's like, is that logger a hunter? And I think he was asking me, wondering if he's scoping things out. And I was like, funny enough, Vinny asked him, and he goes, no, not really.
Yeah.
The dad was like, good.
Yeah.
I had a thought earlier in the week when you first said they were coming in, how funny it would be to, like, behind your back, bring a deadhead over here and talk with the people logging and being like, he's got a camera right here. Carry this deadhead right past it and don't say a word to him.
Yeah.
Just how funny that would be, because you would fly up there in a heartbeat like, what was that you were carrying? Like,
I would probably call Vinny first and be like, hey, man, where are you?
Yeah.
Call this dude.
Lock them in.
Yes. So I forgot about this one, but it would have been in the storm damage that we had over, north of Shreve. It would have been 3 years ago now. Had a crew in there cutting, and I get a phone call. He goes, I just found this huge dead buck. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. What's huge to you? Maybe 140, 150 or whatever. Well, I show up, and this is probably 190-inch deer that they found dead up underneath this treetop. And we went out. I took pictures of it or whatever, so I called up the landowner, and he came out and was like, oh, like, you could just see him. He knew. And and then the landowner got it, and I don't know what he did with it. I'm sure he just Euroed it, and it's sitting in his house somewhere now. But that was a huge deer.
That was a kill from the storm, like a tree landed on it, or
no?
Okay.
Actually, none of that really. I'd never seen a single deer from the storm, even though there's woods that were flattened. I never seen a single deer that got killed during the storm. That one, it looked like he probably got shot, because the storm happened in June, and then the guy was getting pictures of it up until like mid-November. So someone got shot at and never found it.
Wow.
Dang, man, that's nuts.
Yeah.
That is interesting that you said that you never saw a deer killed. You would think, like, unless they just somehow get out of Dodge.
And some of the turkeys that I'm seeing on these properties now too, it's like,
how?
Deer enter how?
You were in a tree, probably.
Yeah, and there was a property that I actually had it marked for a timber sale, and it was going into the spring where, okay, there's a farmer, and a lot of the woods were just islands around his fields, and the price of cherry wasn't very good at the time. So I was like, hey, let's just wait until fall when you get the crops out, then we'll put it out to bid, and then hopefully it'll be cut that winter. Well, June rolled around and just flattened the place. I mean, it was almost like, it's probably like a 95% loss is what I was looking at, and that was, I think they cut like 900,000 board feet out of that property. of storm damage. And very few trees that were left. And there was a lot of maple. I shouldn't say a lot of maple, but there was some maple that were left that I had them just go through and cut those. The only thing that we left was, a good oak with a good canopy and, that wasn't damaged. And that's the only thing that we left, just for hopes to get some oak regeneration going in there, in which there will be. It's basically a clear cut, so you'll have that, but there's going to be management and at that 10 to 15 year mark now. So that was a tough one.
How quick do you have, like, with that storm, as the landowner, how quick do you have to have somebody come out and get those trees out of there before it is a total loss? How long can they lay there for?
So funny thing. So that was June, and then usually within a year, pretty much all the storm damage jobs were done that I had. But actually, just yesterday, there was a crew that just finished up doing a storm damage job, and there was a lot of the logs. I mean, you're losing 3 inches around the outside, but a lot of them, they were up on the root ball. Some of them were still elevated, and they actually still got some decent logs out of it. Now, did the landowner lose out on a lot of money? Absolutely. Wow. And that was the only way. There's a hand cutting crew didn't come in with change. That was where the feller buncher, go through and get, just all those trees are just stacked on top of each other. Now, especially with the regrowth, I mean, there would have been no way a hand cutting crew could have done that. So a lot of those were mechanized crews that came in with a feller buncher, and they're actually able to get through the storm damage.
Forgive me, what is that?
So
I heard you mention that yesterday.
Yeah, big tracked unit with a cutting head.
Okay.
So yeah, it kind of looks like that, and then they usually have a lot of those guys that will use grapple stitters. They come in, not like you're seeing with the table stitter here, come through big. Claws on the back, but yeah, the feller buncher that made it pretty much the only way for a couple properties after the storm damage, and that's when around this area nobody had them before, and now a few companies do, just to get through the storm damage, and now they're using it for clear cuts, and a lot of these guys are branching out doing like the whitetail management, patch clear cuts, stuff like that, because there's some jobs, like say with yours, doing a selective harvest through your woods, where you would almost do more damage with that, driving that machine through the woods, getting those trees to go, get out of there, versus, just a hand cutting crew coming in with a table skid or stuff like that. So there's certain instances where that is a good thing.
Yeah, that's wild.
It's like the Tiger Cat. It's got the grapple, and then it's got the saw underneath. I think you grab the thing.
Yep. That's what it is.
Okay.
Yep.
We're well familiar with those. We're probably going to buy one at some point.
There you go. Just let me know when you do, because I
would love to run one.
Yeah. Park it in the garage.
Yeah.
Allison?
Yeah.
You're not going to believe this, but yeah.
You've heard of feller buncher?
You're going to start parking over there.
Yeah. Don't ask me what I paid for it either.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, I don't know. I might be frightened. You covered it.
I mean, other than, do you have specific plans following what you've got going on back here?
Whatever Vinny recommends.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just for this site-specific thing here.
Yeah. I guess the next step, like, when would you go in and cut those maples? Before next year, right? Because that's when you'd burn.
Yes. Yeah. Go through and get those maples cut right away. Now, but even before the acorn crop, comes on this year. Go through, get a lot of that understory out of there, in which that's a step that, you can do that before, but with this and the timing and everything, okay, we can go through, get those out of there, and still have plenty of time, and, before that acorn crop, would develop and actually, fall. So with that being said, then like the other aspects of your property too, some of that reverted pasture, you had a lot of white pine, but there's also pockets of white oak, and I think you guys have kind of started on that too, is opening up some of the white oak that was starting to get choked out in the other parts of the property too.
And now is when you recommended cutting and treating the multiflora rose and the honeysuckle in there.
Honeysuckle, yep. Moving into the fall, obviously there's deer hunters. Everybody doesn't want to be in their woods in the fall. That's the best time to do it when the sap flow is going down. But if you do it this time of year, July, August time frame, you're still going to get a pretty good kill going through doing a cut stump, on your honeysuckle, autumn olive, stuff like that, or even doing like a full year spray on the multiflora rose, taking care of your invasives. Now, the nice thing about it is, the woods where we're harvesting was wide open woods, no invasives. Now, that's something that you're going to have to look, going into the future, and hopefully with the burns, you can, control that. If not, going through and, using chemical and spraying to keep those invasives out of there, to keep, native plants on that, in that area.
Do you do the burns?
I do not.
No?
I do not. That's there's a lot of liability that come in that. So I usually just try to stay out of that, and I'm busy enough with what I have.
Sure.
That I just don't really get into it. I highly recommend it, and there's people out there that I can recommend to you, to get that done.
Yeah, we've messed around, and in Ohio, I feel like Ohio makes it such a pain in the butt. I see these guys in Iowa lighting up hundreds of acres.
Yeah.
And around here, which I get it.
There's a lot of
houses
loopholes
everywhere.
Yes.
We burn a section about the size of this table at a time and contain it.
Yeah.
My mom and dad are like, "Is it gonna get away?"
Yeah.
I can blow on it.
Right.
Put it out.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people out there like, oh, burning the woods, you're just gonna burn your woods down. No, it's honestly, fire and a chainsaw can be your best friend, when you're talking about management tools for woodlands, and it also can be your worst enemy.
We've had more issues getting it to burn than getting it to stop burning.
Yeah.
Back here. I mean, we've went back there some days and tried to burn it. It's just like, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Yeah. They're having the right conditions to do that. And at the same time, having a professional, someone that knows what's going on with it too, can be the best thing out there for you.
It's probably the route we'll go just to save the headache.
Yeah. And if you can get that burn all at once, definitely.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about burn zones or however people map out properties for burning, we're going to do this section year one, and then they rotate the, burn schedule or whatever. That is not a big enough area to have a big rotation in there across, 3 years. Like, that can be done at once, and you're managing the whole thing at one time.
Yes.
When would you we've always tried burning in March.
Yeah. No,
is that when you would?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Which we'll try to burn that and spend 3 days over the course of a month trying it, and still basically end up pretty futile.
We'll call them the professionals this time.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's so in the weather. And the weather's so unpredictable that, okay, you're trying to align that with your schedules and, when you can get in there and do that, it can be very tricky.
How do you notice, this is a little off topic, but it got me thinking with the burns, how do you notice turkeys adapting to cut hardwoods?
Oh, very, very good.
Do they?
Especially if you're going through and burning after the fact. A lot of those treetops, you got a lot of insects in there, and then you also get the nesting cover with that. And especially if you can open up the canopy, and if it's a good sustainable harvest, where there's still those roost trees, and you have that overstory and that good canopy. I've actually seen a good increase in turkey roosting, and then that nesting and brooding habitat. Especially if you go through, burn it. A lot of that, natives are starting to take hold. You have a very good, brooding habitat that you never had before, where it's just barren, open forest floor.
Yeah, that makes sense. I heard, I listen to too many podcasts. I feel like I'm constantly saying I heard this on a podcast, but Mike Chamberlain was talking about like removing generational roosting sites or whatever. Yeah. So I guess if you're selectively harvesting it though, and leaving some of those roost trees, like you said, once you get that the undergrowth or the understory coming up a little bit, they still have the roosting trees. Now they have better cover. Long term, I feel like that's ideal.
Yeah, and what you look at turkeys are like, okay, I like these big open hardwoods. That's what you want to hunt into. But as far as burning, but then also looking at it from poults, looking at that for better habitat for nesting in the brooding habitat, but having a good mix of that on your property too is even having some of that open timber. But if you can go through and burn it, it's just like a turkey magnet. It almost seems like
that disturbance of anything we've noticed just in the little bit of habitat work we've done just seems to be so conducive for all sorts of wildlife. Yeah. And I think that's what's so interesting about this process is what's aesthetically pleasing to us isn't probably what's best for the deer or the turkeys or wildlife in general.
It's the total opposite. And that's where you're looking at, okay, timber management and wildlife management, and the one forester that you had in before, he was like, oh, this is just a beautiful woods, is it aesthetically pleasing? Absolutely. But from a wildlife standpoint, it was almost a barren landscape. It's like, okay, there's nothing here besides, okay, a couple months out of the year for acorn crop, in which you're still going to have that. There's still a lot of those mature oak trees in here, and it's only going to increase in the coming years too, once those voids kind of get, filled in the canopy, because it's the oak trees that are expanding. A lot of canopies starting to fill in.
I'm excited to see, not necessarily just post cut here, but like in next year and the year to come,
4,
like
5.
I've been in this woods obviously in January, and it's just like you can see a mile, and it's just, a foot deep in leaf litter, and it's just a barren wasteland. It's like I can't wait to see this become a very diverse, if we manage the invasives and get natural, native regrowth or whatever. Like I think this could be sweet.
Yeah,
It's fun.
Absolutely. And seeing that, a lot of people ask, well, okay, I'm just having my woods timbered as, right off the bat, it's going to look open to you. When you go in here this year one, it's going to look open. And I often tell people it's 3 years. That's the mark when you're actually going to start seeing it like, okay, this is what I was wanting. It doesn't happen overnight. That regrowth's going to start coming on. At year 3 is when you're going to start seeing, okay, this is what my goal was. And now I'm starting to see it.
It's exciting. I always love having something to look forward to.
I'm shocked you don't have a camera back there. Well, maybe not. Once they're out of there with equipment, so you don't get a busted up camera. But I figured you'd have a camera back there just to see as wildlife adapt to it. And we were back there just a little bit ago, and you're still seeing deer everywhere. And super cool.
They're curious. And put a camera on. I know there's a few soft maple and hard maple that were mixed in. Put a camera on one of those tops. You'd be surprised.
At the brows.
Oh yes, yeah. There won't be any leaves left in another like 2 weeks.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I'm excited. Yeah, I sent Dad a picture this morning. I walked back there and there was a bunch of deer tracks down the logging road, and I texted it to him because he's super excited. He's just been like, whatever you and Vinny think, do it. Yeah. But I think in the back of his mind, he's he wants it to look nice too. And I'm like, it's not going to look like the park that it did before. It's not going to, but it's for the best. I sent that to him and I said, the deer are already liking it. Yeah. He's like, oh, good.
Yeah. Have that trail leading right into the food plot.
Yeah. Perfect. It's perfect.
That's an interesting thing too, is like how deer respond to different types of pressure. Like this is a very aggressive, but for the deer, like we know there's something going on, and like we can maneuver however we feel like we want to around this pressure. Whereas like hunting pressure, like you're trying to sneak in, and it's a different dynamic there.
Oftentimes, I feel like I'm the one putting the pressure on the deer. So the loggers are going in. They have the saws. They're on the skidder, the dozer when they're going in. I'm the one that's walking in, sneaking around the woods when they're in there cutting, and oftentimes I'm bumping deer that are sitting 150, 200 yards off. Hearing and watching what's happening, but I'm the ones that actually coming in and bumping them because I'm sneaking around the woods, maybe in parts that were already cut or, the parts that haven't been cut yet, checking in on the harvest. I'm the one putting the pressure on the animals, 99% of the time. And there's times where, I'm walking down the logging road, the skidder just went past me, out pops a deer, right in front of me. They're just curious. They hear that noise go away. They're like, okay, now's my opportunity to come out.
That happened yesterday when I walked back there. He was coming through the plot towards me, heading out with some logs, and I was coming up the path, and there was a deer standing there watching him, and I walked like right on top of it.
Yeah.
And he was just standing there. It's like the combines and farm equipment and everything else. They just they know where the threat is.
Yeah. Because they know where it is. It's no different than you've heard stories about like people getting dropped off at their tree stand or moving tree stands or hanging tree stands with a side-by-side running or a truck running with music cranked up or whatever. Like if they know where you're at, they can evade you if they need to. So like it's I don't know.
It's another
interesting
reason,
to me.
Another reason to buy a fellow buncher, just to get dropped off in the stand.
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Fellow buncher. Yeah. Well, it's to get dropped off. It's more of a means of travel.
If you can't understand that, then that's on you. Well, cool, Vinny. I'm sure there's going to be something after we wrap this up that I'm like, dang it, I should have asked him that. But I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
you're a well full of knowledge, and it's been a fun process. I highly recommend anybody listen to this. If you're on the fence, like I was, talk to Vinny or another forester, and your mind will be changed. Someone else, I don't know if it was you, somebody told me, think of it like your flower beds.
Yes.
Like the weeds coming up, like you pull the weeds so that the plants
that was me. Yeah, you're basically going in and plucking the weeds out, to grow better timber. It's basically, and like, farmers too. You got to think of farmers. This is the way, when I walk up to a farmer that, hey, you've called me out, look at your timber. It's like, okay, so you're going to plant your corn or your bean crop and you're not going to spray it. Weeds are going to take over. So basically, yeah, you're weeding your garden, you're controlling your weeds in your field. It's no different than that. Because people are like, oh, I don't want to touch my woods. There needs to be active management for a healthy woods.
That's awesome. To wrap it up, where can people get a hold of you if somebody wants to contact you for this stuff?
Yeah, so there is online, you can Google SAF, there's Ohio Consulting Foresters. I'm on that list, all my contact information there. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram at Heartland Forest Management, and then my direct cell number is 330-465-6346.
Uh-oh, you can get some prank calls
Oh,
now.
probably.
I hope not. Anything else, Easton? You got anything?
I don't think so. That was fun, and I mean, I've been excited to follow along with your process, and it was timely for us to have him on too with this going on, because we not only had more natural dialogue and like questions naturally pop up, but just when you haven't gotten to see the process, you don't know what your questions are. So this was good.
Been looking forward to it for a while, so I appreciate you coming on, making the drive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, man. That's it.